Hey everybody, Dwayne Lay from the LeanHRBlog.com. Going to do a video session today to follow up the last 2 days. We've been talking about Y to X trees, and then yesterday talked a little bit about the difference between fixed costs and variable costs. So the reason I put those two together is so we can have a very short conversation today. Y to X trees are super simple and really powerful, but I think it helps to see one being made so you can think about how to apply it yourself, right? I'm a whiteboard guy, so I got whiteboard and markers. Pen and paper are fine. You can draw these things in the dirt with a stick or your finger if you have to. They're that easy to work with, and they're super powerful. So here's a couple things. We did some examples yesterday looking at breakdowns for business goals and reducing some costs, looking at cost of goods sold, year-over-year labor costs. I want to talk more specifically about HR issues today. So we're going to start with one. We're going to talk about talent acquisition, and a real common metric for talent acquisition to go after is time to fill, right? And when your job is to reduce time to fill, it's a big gummy lump of a lot of activities to take place. You got to figure out how to break those down. So I'm going to make one assumption going in, that time to fill, we're talking about the time from the job being posted until your chosen candidate starts. Okay, so we're actually beyond the acceptance piece. So the first thing we're going to do is look at what makes up this time period. So in my mind, I think of three different pieces. There's the time we post to the time we're ready to interview. There's the time from when we interview to the time we select, and from selection until start. Okay, so this is our level 1X. So if I look at these pieces, I want to drill these down a little bit, right? Because each one of these still, there's a lot of pieces go in, right? So for my next level down, I'm going to go to selection to start. So when I think about what makes up my time from selection to start, how do I break that down to something I can actually impact? So there's a couple pieces here, right? You've got putting your offer together. You've got your contingencies. And you've got your notice period. All right, so notice period, if a candidate tells you they need a month, they're going to need a month, right? Not much you can do about that. Putting your offer together, that's generally a pretty short piece. A lot of time it's automated. So we're going to look at this middle piece right here, the contingency period. So what do we mean by contingencies? Well, for those of you who actually do talent acquisition, I'm sure you're going to think about three things. You've got a background check. You might have drug screening. And you might have education check. So when you start looking at these three pieces, now we can very distinctly say, okay, let's talk about background checks. How long do they take? Well, let's say it's 2 weeks. Now this specifically is an example that we use in our processes to lead them out a little bit. One of the things we found here, how do we reduce this 2-week time after we've made the offer to them, now we're waiting for those 2 weeks to clear, and now we've got notice. And what we did is look at that and we said, well, it's going to take 2 weeks, there's not much we can do about that. What we can control is when we do it. So what we did was change our background check period from once we have our final candidate, we'll do the background check. We actually took a step backwards and said, these are relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of not having that job filled. So rather than wait 2 weeks here and cost us productivity of having the person on board, we're going to back up one step in the process, and we're going to fire off background checks when we're on the last round. So we may be doing 3 candidates, we may be doing 4. But we make sure we've got authorization from all those candidates to be able to do background checks. We fire them off early. So this 2-week period now goes away because it's part of an earlier piece of the process. When we get to making an offer, these contingencies have already been cleared out. So we don't have to wait on these. We still have a drug screen, which is only going to take 2 or 3 days. But that has taken out a big chunk of the time on reducing our time to fill. So just one example. So now let's go a little different. And let's go back to our discussion yesterday about fixed costs versus variable costs. And that's the reason I posted this. Let's say that our new metric is to reduce our cost of HR by 5%. It's pretty common. I know that we've been working with a goal like that for the last 2 or 3 years. And I I doubt that goes away anytime real soon. So an easy way to start breaking this down, because that's a pretty big piece, right? How do you reduce those costs without reducing services? This is why we talked yesterday about fixed and variable costs, okay? So let's break this down. Our first layer is going to be fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs are a little easier to identify. You can look at your budget, you can see what you pay for a lease, you can see what you pay for rent. The problem with that is really tough to impact those fixed costs without doing contract renegotiation. And if you're in a place to do it, that's fantastic. Most of us, though, are going to be looking at variable costs. The beauty of variable costs is small changes can have a huge impact. If you have a transaction you're firing off 100 times and you save $1 doing it, it's $100 in your pocket. It's a bucket full of nickels, but a bucket full of nickels can be worth quite a bit. So we're going to talk variable costs. So we think about what are our variable costs when we get into HR. So a few things that come up here, specifically looking at recruiting again. We have our job board cost. So we're posting a job. The more we post, the more it costs us. You may have some sliding scales in there, but generally speaking, the more you post, the more you're going to pay. You have materials. And then you have, let's say, travel. Right? You may be flying candidates in from around the country to come to work at your great organization. So all of these are very viable places to go. So you may look at other ways to source candidates. You may look at doing video conferences. Let's break down materials a little bit. So what kind of materials do we deal with for candidates? Well, we have applications. We have, let's just call it candidate material. And then let's say new hire packets, right? Let's say that's part of our talent acquisition budget. Each one of these is now a much smaller piece, something we can go back and we can actually impact. So let's talk about our candidate materials a little bit. We may look at this and say, you know, we're really glad we have all of these videos that we're sending out, but it's costing us $1 each to mail those out. If we can put this to an online server, we can deliver it just as fast for a negligible cost. So we may be able to save $1 per transaction just in postage, plus $1, let's say, in production of the DVDs and in packaging. Next, we can look at pamphlets, right? We have materials that we can send out to our candidates. How are we mailing these out? What kind of postage do we pay on these? What is the stock that pamphlet is made out of? Is it heavy paper? Is it costing us more to mail all of those? Again, they're nickels, but a bucket full of nickels is what we're looking for. So you might look at the paper that they're made from. You might look at the ink. You might look at your delivery system. Maybe that's something you can put online. So again, small changes. But when you're looking at 5% increases in your savings, it doesn't take long to add those up from these small pieces. Some of the examples we've had that have come out of these kinds of brainstorming sessions, we looked at how do we do college recruiting? You know, how are we doing gifts to get those high potential candidates in? And we found out that we had redundant systems out there. We were giving people sometimes gift baskets as part of our recruiting and our candidate engagement process that weren't valued by the candidate, and they weren't special in the market, so they didn't really bring us anything. It's those kind of things that are easy to identify. What the White X tree does, it gives you a systematic and logical way to look through those. So don't be afraid to look at variable costs. Sometimes they're a little harder to identify, but those nickels add up. If you have a chance to look at your fixed costs, maybe you can go to a different office space. Maybe changing out your phone plan, changing out your computers can save you money here. These are the kind of things you want to try to identify when you're going through for cost reductions. Same process can be used if you're looking at other metrics. You've got things like time to fill. You've got costs. You've got ROI on your projects. What money are you spending to run these projects? And what can you do to reduce those costs to make them come in a little more effectively? So that's kind of the wrap up of the last couple of days. I'm sure we'll come back to this again, so take your time to look through it, do a little exercise with it, try it out, get comfortable with it, because it's a really powerful tool you want to make sure you learn. Thanks for showing up. See you later.